So thank you for joining me on the Art of the Album
You're welcome.
to talk about The Party's Over, the debut album from Talk Talk, and the work that you did for them. This album, I was thinking about it, and I was actually listening to it last night. And it wasn't a band that was actually in my household growing up. I was born 1980, and it wasn't one that I know, that I'm familiar with for a reason I know. But it's so familiar. It so feels like a soundtrack of my childhood and of the 80s. And I think you said that in the book.
Yes, well, I guess you would have been 1 year old when I did this job. I was thinking back to that time, and I knew Keith Aston, who was their manager, already. He was a friend, and it was one weekend we were just chatting at his house, actually, when he lived in Sussex, and he confided in me that he was thinking about managing a band, and he didn't really know what to do with them in terms of presenting, and that was his dilemma. And he asked me basically if I'd like to think about the prospect, really, of doing something, a way of presenting them. That was how the job came about in the first place.
Okay, and that's the very dawn of the 80s, when there's a lot of new romantics around, a lot of posing outfits, and they sat and talk were to be positioned slightly outside of that, I guess.
Well, I think initially the record company thought that was their sort of slot in the music genre, but I don't think they wanted to be pigeonholed. It's just that they were doing very poppy things at that particular time. And I suppose that they wouldn't have had any success if they hadn't have had some sort of success with their first single, which was very poppy. And they quickly moved away from that in terms of the musical style, as most people know. But so I guess they were also seen to be the next Duran Duran, which they always hated, of course, being likened to them. So that, I think there was an automatic reflex action to try and steer away from that image, right from the beginning. So that was the sort of, landscape at the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just thinking about the music being something that somehow must have been in the background a lot when I was growing up, because it's very familiar to me, and kind of like us saying, and like you said in the Spirit of Talk Talk book, that it's kind of let me quote you accurately. I think Talk Talk embody the 80s, and I think that's very true. And when we first talked to you about doing editions of the work that you'd done for them, that the Party's Over is slightly different to a lot of the other work that you did, and it really, that image was so familiar to me. It's such a strong, unique, and powerful piece of imagery. And it's really interesting to me to hear about how you came up with that, not having heard if I'm right, you hadn't heard the music when you began to do the design.
No, it was very early days. I hadn't actually heard anything, funnily enough, but that proved to be the norm as time went on. Keith just basically asked me to think about it, and I didn't really give it too much thought, to be fair. I just thought, well, I haven't got much to go on here. I just went with the idea of the name of the band, Talk Talk, and thought I could do something with that idea. So that's how the mouth the lips came about. Just my sort of lateral thinking, really. And I also felt that if I did something non-specific like that, just representing a face, the eyes for the lips for the eyes as well, that really emphasized the idea of talk to me, because there was two sets of lips for the eyes. So I suppose it's about sound and vision in a sort of oblique way. But I also saw it being on a white background, something that could almost work like a logo in many ways. And in fact, it did adapt quite well for doing, ads and various promotional stuff. So it worked, on many levels, I suppose, as a kind of icon. And so that was the starting point, really, for doing anything else. And it went down well with the band and the record company. And literally, they just decided to stick with me for the next one, and so on. But it was more than just the album, because they wanted a single to go with it as well. That was Today, and it's actually here in the book. I think you'll be able to see that. So that was just one of the lips. So it echoed the album cover in many ways, and literally a direct link to the album with the three mouths. But there was also the added bit on here, which would be worth explaining, on the blood drop, which is forms part of the addition to the lips, is a reference to heroin, which is mentioned in the lyrics. Well, not specifically, but that was kind of part of the. I mean, it's a double A side, I suppose, but that was the reference to heroin. And I think Mark's, as I understood it, Mark's brother died of heroin overdose. So maybe I'm not sure if he was singing about that particularly, but that was the reference I was picking up on.
Okay, and something that maybe also is a topic of the era. And then you turned that into a tear in the album cover.
Well, it was just echoing the album cover in that way, actually. So I did think about it as a kind of series of images relating to the album. The next one was My Foolish Friend, which again was forming part of the face. So that was what the image was like. But I was also the eye with, it was like a clown's eye, really, referencing the foolish part of the title. So that was the context of that one. But again, everything was on a white background, so it all gelled together quite well, I think, forming a consistent theme, if you like. And
yeah, beautifully
so I think that was it. And given the success of that, they decided to stick with me moving forward. So I mean, it's quite a sort of, that's really a simple outline of how it came about. Nothing too more. Sorry,
James. How did, so I have a couple of questions. One is, did you over that period meet with the band, or was it very remote sort of working project?
Oh, well, I did, yes. Keith took me to a couple of venues, concerts they were doing in London. I think one was at Legends, as far as I can recall, a well-known venue. Um, so I did actually get to see them live a couple of times. Um, but I didn't feel I needed any lyrics in this particular case, because it was, it was just a concept based on the name of the band, really. But that seemed to be enough, really. I think the whole premise was the brief I was given, that was that the band didn't want to be represented in a stereotypical way, actually, which most bands were being represented at the time by, well, just having photographs of the band on the cover. That's simply that. I don't think they wanted to be seen as cover boys, pin-ups, or going along with that general idea of pretty boys, boy band type thing.
Yeah, the prevalent sort of aesthetic.
It was always the music that was the important thing, not the image, I suppose. So that's where I came in. I was providing the image, if you like, for the band, which sidestepped all those issues for them, particularly Mark. He was very keen not to do that. So I suppose the directive was coming directly from him. Yeah.
I mean, I feel there must have been a sense of them conveyed to you, because it's such a successful partnership, and even if you hadn't gone on to do so many other brilliant pieces for them, it's just this in isolation is such a perfect pairing. It feels like you knew them really well, and like you'd listened to the album many times before you did the cover, and it's just, I guess it's just luck and magic and skill.
Yeah, no, there wasn't a lot of time. I mean, when bands are busy, and it was a success straight off the bat, really. That's why the first single really put them on the map, and that's why I had to do a second single. And when that happens, the record company want you to sort of be out there performing and promoting the album, so on and so forth. So very little time to do much else but your job, I suppose, then. And I was busy. It was a busy period for me as well. I was doing all sorts of things. It was probably the busiest period of my career in the 80s.
Well, let's go back a little bit into that then. So career-wise, what was your run up to that? So were you an art school graduate? Had you had for those that don't know, what was your kind of
Oh, I see what you mean. I mean, I left college in the mid-60s and moved to London to find work, basically. So I've been working since the 60s. I only worked for a year in total, but that just happened to be for 2 record companies. So I cut my teeth doing album cover work and design, and learned the whole process of album. That's how I got into illustration, actually, because I was seeing myself more as a designer. But when I worked at Decca Records, particularly moving on from Pi Records, you were given photographs to use on album covers, and if there wasn't anything supplied by a band, then you had to come up with something. So that was a treat, really. That was the time to be creative, and that's how I got into illustration. It literally springboarded me into it.
Working to the 12-inch.
Yeah. But it was a good grounding for me, because it was all kinds of music, all kinds of genres, not just pop. I mean, Decca Records was a huge company at the time. They had a vast repertoire of artists on their books, and I did a lot of classical stuff. That was nice to do. Jazz, opera, a real mix of stuff, actually, and I enjoyed the variety. to be fair. There wasn't that much pop music that I got involved in, really. It was, as I say, most of it was supplied in terms of, you know, if the Rolling Stones, who happened to be with Decca at the time, they just supplied a photograph that they'd had, you know, a photographer do a session with, and you'd end up just having to put the name of the band and the logo on the front. I mean, that was pretty much all you had to do, apart from the credits on the back, that sort of thing. So creatively, there wasn't a lot to be desired doing that sort of thing. But as I say, there were the opportunities to do other things that came about. I mean, I did a box. Well, it wasn't a box set, actually. It was a set of album covers for Buddy Holly, which I enjoyed doing. And all the previous photographs of him had been used up until that time. So I ended up doing a drawing, which became was used for all 4 albums, I remember. So yeah, but that springboarded me, as I said, into illustration. And after that, I only worked for a year for the 2 companies. After that, I moved. I worked for a year with Alan Aldridge in the 60s. I started doing model making work then, and that led me to forming my own studio. And I did that for 8 years. So that was the mid 70s, and then I went completely freelance from then on, 75, 76. And so I'd been working for a while in the style I'm known for from that period on, I suppose. But I was, I was fortunate. One thing led to another. I was busy all the time. And, I was working in all different areas: advertising, publishing, editorial. So I had quite a good spectrum of work behind me. And
did you see that time with Alan Aldridge as having had any influence on your own work, or was it more just a practical kind of experience?
Well, I think all things influence you one way or the other. It was it was early days for me. I was learning all the time. It was just a matter of having more opportunity to work on different projects that I think helped me more than anything else. My main role there was doing model making, which became, part of the big project for the Beatles illustrated lyrics book, which was a big thing at the time. But I was also doing experimental illustration work as well. But that took off, the model making thing, and that's what I sort of ended up doing most of in the studio. And in the end, I didn't want to be so pigeonholed, so I wanted to get more into doing more illustration than just 3D work. Yeah. And so that's where I became a bit more experimental, and my style of work evolved from there, pretty much.
And the making of these illustrations, that's all done in pencil and paper, watercolor. Is it what's the material that you used originally to do this design?
For which design?
For the Talk cover for Party's Over.
Well, I started off working in oils, actually, but I experimented with all sorts of mediums. But I evolved into working in acrylics, mainly because it dries quicker than oils and reproduces better. You get lots of reflections with oils. The camera tends to pick up all sort of imperfections more. So it's a good medium from that point of view. It's quick to dry, and you don't get those kind of drawbacks with that you do with oils. That's become my main medium. Acrylics on canvas or canvas board. Yeah.
It's lovely to hear you talk about that idea that you're creating this vision, and you're also thinking about it in terms of something that can be used in the subsequent promotional material, and like that can be almost like a logo, because that's a different creative parameter to if you were just coming at it from this is my work and you can use it. You're really thinking about the end use there, and what you end up with there is something more creatively interesting.
My background training as a designer, I tend to come at illustrations from a designer's point of view, which is quite unusual, I suppose. Most artists are not thinking that way around. But I've always had quite a strong vision of how I want an image to end up, and how it's going to be applied. So it's a kind of thinking about the whole process, not just working on a piece of artwork and seeing what you can do with it. I tend to have thought that through from the outset.
Well, I think that comes across, because then you get the work in its purest form is the work as it is. It's not adjusted or squished to fit this new outlet. It's you've done it with this in mind, and actually flourished and thrived within that format. And that's the testament to that is that they continued with you, and that you've been so successful. And I think that image has been so successful. I mean, it works so well on a tiny screen on a phone, and it works beautifully as a 19-inch square edition print too. I mean, it's just very tempting then to lead into what you've done afterwards, but I think we'll save that for another episode. I want to talk about your paintings, which I've had the privilege of seeing now in real life, and how they've translated into album covers. But
okay, well, that's nice of you to say that, but it's also made me realise that of course that's all well and good if you have the ability to carry that through with the design side of it. And in this particular case, I saw the album cover on a white background, but the EMI ended up putting a grey border around it, which wasn't my choice, and it was used on the single as I intended, actually, a 12-inch single without a grey border. But I think they might have done that just to differentiate between the two, except the album came first, and theoretically that should have been without the border. So who knows what decisions were made. But I wasn't involved in the decision making at that stage. But these are the sort of things that happen when it's not all within your control. Annoyingly, but nowadays I tend to have more control over everything, and that's part of why I take on a job. Particularly with album covers, I see the thing through from beginning concept right through to the printing process. So I make sure everything is as intended, if you like.
Well, if it's any consolation, the grey doesn't stick in anyone's memory. It's just what's within.
I think we're recording. I'm just going to give you a quick tour of my studio. This is my main workspace with my computer. There's another workstation, generally painting and such what. Here's the view you can see from my window, with the panoramic view over Hythe Bay, which leads into the English Channel across to France. And Further down the studio, another workspace at the end there, but cluttered up with stuff. Pigeonholes for all my books, reference material, various collections. There's another table workspace, piece of construction on the go. Round again. Last year's Christmas card, it's still there. I was hoping to put it into something permanent, but it's too difficult to do that. It's my Eco Warrior book, recent edition, and more pigeonholes, on and on and on. Another workspace that's covered in pebbles at the moment. Give you a close-up view of some pebbles. Piece of construction work. From an exhibition. Another construction work. Found objects, mainly plastic. Well, it is all plastic. There's bits and pieces. Another thing on the go here. Spirit of Talk book, 2nd edition. Back to my workspace. That's about it, really. That should give you a good idea of my work area. It's basically 2 rooms knocked into one, actually. Top floor of the house, and great working space separate from the rest of the house altogether, so I can literally just go to work anytime I like. Bit more meandering around and about just to complete the tour. Bits and pieces here and there. Another saw, a couple of saw motifs. That's it.